Zoom. Let me put my video on. Welcome to everyone joining in person and via Zoom. I'm Ann Pernick from Safe Cities at Stand.earth. We work with advocates and government leaders to pass policies at the local level and sometimes at the state level to stop fossil fuel expansion and phase out fossil fuels. And that includes building electrification. Thank you to everyone at New York Communities for Change for hosting us and for all the great work you do, which Safe Cities is proud to support. Thank you also to Lead Locally and Stand.earth Research Group for your partnership on the report, and also to Assemblyperson Emily Gallagher for joining us today. At Stand.earth, we appreciate the importance of recognizing the original people of the lands we occupy. I want to acknowledge that we are on the unceded lands of the Canarsie and Munsee Lenape in what's called Brooklyn. And today we're doing two things together. We're releasing a report on the climate impact of electrifying new residential buildings in the US, and we're celebrating the leadership of New York on local and statewide building electrification. And now, as soon as he's a moment to finish doing the tech magic that he's in the middle of doing, I'd like to introduce my colleague Nathan Taft, who's the lead from Safe Cities on the report, and then Nathan will introduce our other speakers and begin the conversation. Nathan is the digital and communications lead for Safe Cities with Stand.earth. He also moonlights as a US-based campaigner for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, where he recently ran a winning campaign to get the state of California to endorse the treaty. Before becoming a part of the Stand.earth team, Nathan ran Katie Porter's social media during her successful first run for the US House of Representatives in 2018. When he's not out working to take on the fossil fuel industry, you can probably find him hiking, cooking, or hanging out with his dogs and two cats. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan.
Thanks, Ann. And before I jump in, can folks on the webinar, can they hear me okay? Yes, I'm getting nods. Okay, wonderful. Gonna do the tech and the hosting. So I'm here today with Sikora from New York Communities for Change. Big shout out to them for letting us use this venue for our event. And then we're joined virtually by Assemblymember Emily Gallagher. Say hi, we wave to her, and also Dr. Devyani Singh of Stand.earth Research Group. I'm going to give a quick bio of each of them so folks know who we're with today, and then we're going to jump into our panel. So, Assemblyperson Emily Gallagher represents the North Brooklyn neighborhoods of Greenpoint and Williamsburg in the New York State Assembly. Elected in 2020, Emily has fought to address New York's deep inequality and dire housing crisis while accelerating the state's transition to renewable energy. In the 2023 session, she led the charge on the All-Electric Buildings Act to phase out fossil fuel hookups in new construction, a first in the nation. A native of Rochester, New York, Gallagher majored in cinema and visual studies with a dual minor in art and history at Ithaca College. This path led her to New York City, where she worked several jobs at art galleries and as an artist assistant and struggled to make ends meet, sometimes balancing up to 5 part-time jobs at once. Gallagher developed a deeper sense of the profound inequalities and challenges confronting working people in New York, and became passionately interested in the stories of her Greenpoint neighbors, particularly the district's rich history of local community activism. Welcome, Assemblymember Gallagher. All right.
Nathan,
Yes.
We're hearing it would be good if I bring the owl closer to
Let's
you.
do it.
I'm gonna try to.
And I actually think that this the sound got worse when you turn me all on. It sounds weirdest when it comes directly to the computer.
So I'm just move right there.
So I think given that there's more people online.
Sure. Why don't we use the computer, right? That's fine. Totally.
And the computer video too, right? So they can see you.
We can. Are you going to see both of us? Thanks for bearing with us, folks. You want to get in? We're going to use the
Yeah, I'm right here.
All right, so folks can hear us now, which is good. Okay, folks can hear us well. Okay, folks can hear us well. And
Is it better now? Folks can see us. I'm with Pete here. Is this better for folks online? I'm getting yeses.
Okay.
Crystal clear. Perfect. We nailed it. We got it. Rest is a piece of cake.
That's how you pass a bill.
All right. Next, I just want to quickly introduce Dr. Devyani Singh, who's joining us via Zoom today. And she is an investigative researcher working on energy and climate policy. Her interdisciplinary research has included energy access and transitions in the global south, air quality, evaluating climate impacts of national policies, natural resource economics, environmental finance, forest sustainability, and methane emissions from oil and gas production. In her free time, she can continue hiking with her dog Zephyrus, playing ultimate frisbee, or running along the seawall in Vancouver. Everyone say hello to Dr. Devyani Singh. And finally, we have Pete.
Hello.
Pete Sikora is the Climate and Inequality Campaigns Director with New York Communities for Change. He was integral to the passing of the All-Electric Building Act. Previously, he led CWA District 1's legislative, political, and mobilization work in New York, and he was organizing director for NYPIRG. He's from New York City and holds a BA from Cornell University and an MBA from NYU. He's married and has 2 kids, and it was his birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, Pete.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really want to thank all 3 of you for joining us, both in person and virtually. And I also want to recognize a few more people who are here, including John Paul from Lead Locally, who's over there, who made this report that we're launching today possible. I also want to thank the Stand Research Group, who with Dr. Devyani Singh, who also made this report possible, and as well as Anne, who introduced me earlier, it's over there, and Logan, who's been helpful throughout this whole process as part of Safe Cities. And I believe they will be taking questions from folks as we go through. I don't know, we didn't end up getting note cards, did we? Okay, well, just people can raise their hands. And if you're in the chat, if you're online, you can just put your questions into the Q&A section and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So with all that said, I'm going to jump into the questions, and I'm going to start with you, Pete, and Assemblymember Gallagher. Why do you feel that building electrification is important?
Well, thanks so much for having us. This is a huge topic, and generally, this is my second hybrid event where you're both in person and online. So it's kind of cool to make this happen, sort of in the real world and also online. So the All-Electric Building Act, ending gas and new construction in New York, is a huge deal on 2 levels. Number one is the real world impact. It saves money, creates jobs, fights climate change, cuts air pollution. So what it will do is end all oil and gas in all new construction with some minor exceptions. So what that does is it saves money because in new construction, you can build with technology, energy efficiency, and heat pumps that enable lower prices than in gas and in oil. So that's a nice benefit compared to fossil fuel dependency. The second thing is that it creates a lot of jobs in the clean energy industry. So moves jobs from installing gas and into now installing clean energy and energy efficiency. So that's a really good thing too. Net, there's probably an increase in jobs as well. And then the third thing, and what motivates climate activists, is that it fights climate change. It is a bottom line condition for global survival to stop building new gas, oil, and coal infrastructure. The IEA in its modeling says that in 2025, fossil fuel boiler sales in all buildings, not just new, need to be banned in order to reach 1.5 degrees. And prevent cooking beyond that. So that's pretty bad because that's clearly not going to happen. So, that is really terrifying. But New York at least has done the basics of new buildings. We need to move to a lot more things, but the whole globe needs to start moving to this sort of policy, which Berkeley, California pioneered a few years ago and has now spread in a big way with the first state law to do it.
Thank you, Pete.
Sure.
Assemblymember Gallagher, what is building electrification to you? Why do you feel it's important?
Well, I agree with everything Pete just said. You really covered the gamut. But
Damn.
I would say that it's really critical for us as state governments to be doing what we know now the federal government will not, which is move away from the fossil fuel industry. And we've seen the outsized power of the fossil fuel industry really kneecap so many of the initiatives that we've been trying to do, including the original Build Back Better, right? With their interest in Manchin and everything like that. Everybody needs to be thinking about the environmental protections that we can offer, but also cutting back our own use individually is important, but industry-wide is even more important. Real estate is one of the biggest industries and the biggest polluters in the state. A lot of folks focus on transportation. We really, by focusing on buildings, have cut out a huge chunk of emissions. And additionally, it's very simple to do when you start with new construction. So the All Electric Buildings Act is about new construction, and it's easy at this point to have other forms of heating, cooling, and cooking power. So
Thank you. I mean, you both hit it right on the head with what's going on and why this matters. And so we've known that building electrification policies, stopping new construction, was making an impact on emissions, right? But we didn't know exactly how much. And so in addition to celebrating New York's wins here today, we want to launch a report that will really give us a roadmap and a look at just how much emissions are actually reduced when you switch to all electric buildings, and where those policies could have the most impact. And so, Devyani, we knew we wanted this data. Like, we understood that this was going to be important. And so we came to you with the problem, and then you came up with a brilliant solution and way to get it. So can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. So if we want to understand what the impact these policies could have in future, banning gas from or like removing gas hookups to new buildings, there are two things you would need to understand. The two main things is you would want an estimate of projected new buildings that would be built, preferably at a county level. And then we need to know how much gas would these new buildings use per new unit that was built. So I went about looking at lots of data sources, and that included, government data in the US, such as the US National Census, the Building Permit Survey, American Housing Survey. I also then got some of the gas use data by climate zone, by housing type. Is it a single family unit, a multi-unit in a building? And also at the state level, from the EIA or the Energy Information Administration in the US. I also got some climate zone maps, and then, put them all together. So this is like a map of at the county level, what you're seeing on the screen, for the estimated total number of new units that will be built over the next 7 years. And I say 7 years because we're, the short-term target usually in most of our climate modeling is like 2030, and then you look at 2050. And so this is some of the units. And then I pulled together, like I said, this gas use data in, cubic feet. And this is kind of what it looks like. And you can see it's pretty, obviously colder regions use more gas, warmer regions don't use as much. And so I combined all this data. There was a lot more than just these two, trust me, and came up with something that looks like this. It's kind of like a typical heat map showing the cumulative metric tons of carbon dioxide that would be emitted over a period of 7 years from 2023 to 2030 from all new buildings that come up at a county level that would have a gas hookup. And, I pointed out, I've highlighted New York in that corner because we're in New York. Well, some of the people physically are in New York right now. So.
Yeah. No, it was really fascinating to see you build that out and put those pieces together. Were there any like really key findings and things that just kind of like stood out to you once we actually had all this data together?
Yeah, and the first thing and what really stands out is that when you look at all the projected emissions increase over the next 7 years, there's literally only 100 to 115 counties, and they are concentrated across 63 metropolitan areas that would be emitting more than 50% of these projected emissions. And so, if we were to target the policies just at the 63 level, you could reduce 50% of projected emissions. These, other than New York, all the others named on this slide are the top 20 metropolitan areas and their surrounding counties. New York came in at, New York City, not to say, came in at number 26. And this is kind of what I've put with the heat map and the counties. And you can see that all those top emitting, like I said, counties are really just concentrated. And what does this mean? So these 63 top metropolitan areas are projected to emit cumulatively about 72 million metric tons of CO2. Well, what does that mean, you ask? Well, that would be the same amount of emissions that would be generated by burning about 80 billion pounds of coal. That's what we're looking at, just from these 63 metropolitan areas. But if we were to take all of the US across all of these counties, we're looking at, if we were not to have any building electrification in a business as usual scenario, about 140 million metric tons. That's like over 150 billion, I'm not saying million, billion pounds of coal being burned, and equivalent to emissions of 37.5 coal plants in the US per year.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Devyani. I mean, it's
a lot. It's a lot. I mean, it's a lot in terms of the direct impact, but I think there's also a very large symbolic value to ending gas in new construction entirely, because it sends a signal to the gas industry and the finance industry that growth is done. And that has very big kind of political and economic implications for the fossil fuel industry. So on the one hand, there's the direct impact, which is very important. But it is not as big as an existing building, so which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it is important. And in addition to that, cutting off the growth is a huge economic signal to the industry and its investors. And it's a very simple concept that powers through the kind of blather that's out there. Gas is done in new construction in New York. By law, overdone. That's a very important signal.
No, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And the leaderships that has been shown by people like yourself and Assemblymember Gallagher and other folks around the country is just, it's amazing. When you look at what is going on in this country with climate change and with the health impacts of fossil fuels, it's really inspiring. And so, but what was really interesting when we looked at this map, and you can actually see it right now, and it's standing out, there is a lot of red in states like Texas and Florida. And for folks who don't know, Texas and Florida are more conservative areas, and they have actually passed these things called preemption laws. And what that means is that they have done what they have done if they said the people in the local municipalities cannot pass building electrification policies. They can't say that we only want all electric buildings. And that's a big problem. So the other thing we wanted to look at in this report is what could folks do in those preemption communities, because we can't get to where we need to get to without bringing those folks on board. And so obviously this is going to vary from place to place, and we encourage you to read the whole report to learn more about this. But we found that different kinds of incentives, everything from local financial and tax incentives to building with electric instead of gas, using building performance standards to improve the efficiency of buildings because electric appliances are far more efficient than gas appliances. And then also just education, showing people what's available, why building with electric is better, and especially right now how it can be even cheaper because of all the money that's coming from the federal government through the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's a lot of places that even if you're in a preemption state, even if you're in Tampa Bay or Dallas, Fort Worth, or some of these other places where the state has preempted them, there's still a lot that can be done. And so there's two other big points I wanted to make around the report, and then I'm going to move into bit more of a discussion format. But can we go to the next slide, Devyani? So I just wanted to show this, and this is actually really interesting, speaks to your point, because it's important to stop new growth and not get lock-in. And at the same time, it's very important to, you can't get out of a hole until you stop digging. Every single new building with gas hookups that gets built is another one we're going to have to retrofit over the next few years. And it's a huge problem. But when you actually look at the emissions just from existing buildings from all of 2020, which is this middle bar here on this graph that you're seeing on the screen, compared to all the cumulative emissions from that you could be prevented between 2023 and 2030, it's actually significantly more from existing buildings from just 1 year compared to the cumulative emissions over 7. And so what that means is that while we need to continue and pursue new building electrification policies, we also need to be paying way more attention to existing buildings and finding solutions to that and to getting that done. And that is just going to be crucial in this fight and in this movement. And then the last thing I just wanted to show is just, this is some good news coming out of this, is that if you actually look at the next slide, there's been some polling done by Yale, and it shows that overwhelmingly across the whole country, even in red states, you have huge sums of people who believe global warming is happening. Global warming is happening. That wasn't true even 10, 15 years ago, not in this kind of way. It is an average of 73% at the county level believe global warming is happening. And even when, and so then if you go to the next slide, what you can actually see is counties juxtaposed by people who want local climate action. They want their local officials to take more climate action. And you can see there's darker colors across the map. At an average of 59% of people in counties want their local elected officials to do more on climate. To me, that's a mandate. That's overwhelming. You win an election 59 to 41%. That's a landslide. So it is going to be so crucial for us to do more on this, and not just in places where it's already being done, but everywhere across the whole country. And with all that in mind, I want to turn to Assemblymember Gallagher and to you, Pete, to talk more about how this happened, because we need to just celebrate, honestly, both of you for the work that both you and your organization and your allies and you and your allies in the Assembly made by getting, Local Law 97 and getting that on board, for getting the All Electric Building Act on board, which was the first in the nation to require, at a state level, to require all electric buildings. And so what we want to know, I want to take this question to both of you, maybe to you first, Assemblymember Gallagher, is not every government can use the same approach, but in terms of building support for these kinds of policies, in terms of bringing in key stakeholders and leaders to get them on board, what are some of the lessons that you've learned from your campaigning in this recent time?
Yeah, I was honored to carry this bill. And when I started working with it, Pete and New York Communities for Change and an entire coalition of organizers had already just won this at the citywide level here in New York City. So they had some knowledge that hopefully in a bit, Pete can tell us about what they learned. But I would say at the state level, what I really learned was that when it comes to climate knowledge and the science and the technology piece that is absolutely critical to understand, a lot of legislators don't have that at their fingertips, and they do not necessarily know where to look for that information. And that made them very susceptible to misinformation from the fossil fuel industry. So I think some of the biggest achievements that we had was we have such a great community of scientists in New York State, from Cornell University and other wonderful institutions, who were able to really authoritatively give detailed answers. We had a hearing on the All Electric Buildings Act in 2021 or in 2022 that really paved the way for us to get it passed in 2023, and having those scientists and the technology folks and the folks who were able to talk about how cheap it was to have this kind of technology in their home, how exceptionally well it worked. All of that was really persuasive and a very important part of the arguments that we made. The other thing that I would note is that having an inside-outside strategy was imperative. There was too much at stake on the inside, both in terms of voter disinformation, voters being scared about what was happening, and about, you know, the general control that the fossil fuel industry has on many elected officials because of financial contributions. To have the press, to have constituents, to have scientists and universities all working together to break through that disinformation, break through the inertia, and say this is not only feasible, it's important to us, and it is critical for you to do something on climate, and this is an easy win. That was really, really important. And I'll turn it over to Pete to say more.
You know, we were very lucky that Emily picked up this bill because one of the key factors was that she built a team of legislators that worked this problem and was extremely active herself. So, you know, it is unfortunately true that you can kind of get stuck with a prime sponsor who sucks, and then you have to say nice things about them, even as you know that actually they're not very good at this, right? So we did not have that problem here. We had the opposite, which was a prime sponsor who actually is pushing her colleagues to do this and is willing to share credit internally with colleagues and create a team internally to actually push. So that really matters because not being deferential and being active internally is very, very important. And in legislatures, there's a herding dynamic where people can feel like they just gotta like kind of be part of the herd. That's the safest place to be. And so there's a real reluctance on the part of a lot of legislators to even do what you would think are the basics of their job, which is to go to other legislators and say, can you co-sponsor this bill? Can you go to leadership and ask them to move it? Like, that's actually not that common. I know that sounds crazy to somebody who doesn't do this a lot, but that's just the reality. So, you know, Emily did a fantastic job on this and we're ever grateful. So that's no slight on our prime sponsor in the Senate, very active as well, but he's not on this webinar. So there you go. So I do want to say that was really important, right? So thank you, Emily, for all of that. That was huge. And but there are other factors as well. Yeah. So you know what we try to do at New York Communities for Change is combine our organizations based in communities of color, Black and Latino communities that are low income, low moderate income, with white progressives who are active on climate, put together those two forces into a powerful political force that in a blue state is a dominating coalition in a primary election. This is a blue state, so the primary is the election that really drives things. So if you can mobilize that kind of a coalition in a blue city or a blue state, almost every city is blue, that is a winning coalition in a blue place. So that's our theory here. That really doesn't obtain in a red state or maybe even a purple state, but in a blue place, a city or a blue state, that is a winning kind of political combination to mobilize in a primary. So, you know, we implicitly show that with lots of people holding signs at events, showing up to lobby their legislators, showing up and standing around at press conferences where we release reports. You know, those kinds of activities, buses to Albany for rallies, petitioning on the ground, all of those kinds of things together show that there is a base of people that care about this. And legislators see that, the governor sees that, that matters a lot. So that kind of multiracial coalition in a hard-hitting coalition that is pressing people really is important. I'll add a couple more things on messaging. Our first year, we went with fighting climate change as kind of our lead message. We had just won at the city level. That was an amazing campaign in and of itself. So we powered into the state and tried to pass this in about 5 months. which is in retrospect an insane idea. However, we came pretty close and set it up for the next year. The big shift we made in messaging was to start to talk more about saving money and make that our frontal message. So save money, create jobs, fight climate change was our strong message to pass this. And that resonated a lot with legislators and with the general public. And then finally, partisan politics really matters here too. And so there was an election where one of the assembly opponents of this bill was defeated by a incoming legislator who is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. She won an important race, an underdog election, to defeat a crusty incumbent who would kind of present like he cared about this stuff, but actually was not helping at all. And in fact, was just, undermining everything. So that was a big message. That race was in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York. So that sent a big message to the political system that, like, the climate people, they've got juice. And she made climate a fundamental part of her campaign, building public renewables, other issues. And so that was really important as well.
Yeah. Thank you both for sharing that. I really hope that other states can take the lead, and it's not next year, this time next year, it's not just New York who's passed an all-electric building act. You get California, you get Washington, get Oregon, get other folks on board. It's going to be really, really important.
Yeah. Let me add one other thing.
Yeah, one more thing. What you got?
When I talk about this coalition, right, what I'm really talking about is a coalition of organizations. And it was a multiracial coalition of groups that had a base in different communities that together shared a theory that we worked with Emily and articulated. So, you need a crew to do this. It's not a thing that one person can do. It's a thing that multiple groups working together that have a strong base that's people powered can get done. And then there were other supporters as well, but that's really the core of it.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Assemblymember Gallagher, one more question for you, which is, we know there were other bills like New York heat, for example, that unfortunately didn't quite get past this session. What's next for you and your allies in the assembly?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. New York heat is what we are really focusing on from the same kind of movement base that we've been talking about. It was a big surprise to many of us that it didn't pass. It seemed like it went along with everything else we had done. But I would say the other thing that we're very concerned about, there's everything that we passed this year for climate has like a step 2 or step 3 that we need to watch. So with the Build Public Renewables Act, which we got passed in part because of Sarah Hannah Shrestha, who is the my colleague, my beloved colleague, who Pete was just mentioning, won a race around climate. We are really concerned about the rollout of that and how the departments are going to really facilitate that. So we're really looking to stay on that piece. But I think the other thing is thinking about, so we've got the new construction, but of course we know retrofits have a really terrible, old buildings have a terrible problem with emissions. So doing retrofits is going to be a really, really difficult and important thing. And I think one of my allies from our climate team on the inside is going to be picking that up and fighting for that. So that's something that we've got our eyes on for next session. Thank you.
Thank you for all your work. I got one last question for you, Pete, and then we want to open it up to folks here in the room and also on Zoom to ask any questions they may have to fill out the remainder of the time here. But this last question to you, Pete, is that, so New York State passed this great law, all electric buildings, everything's solved, right? There's nothing else needs to get
We're done. We're packing up. Go home.
What's going on in New York City and other local governments in New York? What should they be going after now that this has happened at the state level?
You've been foreshadowing this really nicely, which is that the top source of pollution in New York State is building energy use. And in New York City, that's 70% of the pollution. Nationally, cars and trucks are the top source of climate pollution, but a close second is buildings. And in New York, because of New York City and density, it's buildings are the top source. So as big as new construction is, it's 90% of the square footage that will be up in New York City in 2050 was already built. So almost everything is about the existing buildings. So what we want to do is save money, create jobs, and fight climate change by getting aging buildings or new inefficient buildings up to a high level of energy efficiency. And that's a great proposition for creating enormous numbers of jobs to cut pollution and lower utility bills. So that's what we've done in New York City by passing a great law called Local Law 97, which a similar kind of campaign got passed at the city level in 2019. Mayor Eric Adams, who is nominally a Democrat, but is really in the pocket of the real estate industry, is now proposing to weaken that law through regulatory action. So we're in a fight right now defensively to keep him from doing that. And if he does do it, get the council to override him. But fundamentally, the law is there. Even if he weakens it a little bit or even severely, it's still an amazing accomplishment. And ultimately, buildings will have to follow it. So from our perspective, you have to be able to beat the real estate industry and the gas utilities. And that's a very powerful opposition. Emily, Food and Water Watch, us, NIPERG, We Act, bunch of groups together, rewiring Earth Justice. We beat them at the state level. We've beaten them at the city level, but it is not an easy thing, you know? So that's what I would point towards is I think that it is actually relatively easy to pass ending gas in new construction because there's no cost implications that are negative. Right from the jump, it's totally practical right out of the gate. And it is a simple policy that legislators can easily understand and you can get done. The big kahuna, though, is the existing buildings. In New York City, there are 1 million buildings, 50,000 of them, just 5% are large buildings. And those are covered by Local Law 97. They're the large source of the city's pollution. So that's Local Law 97. What we want to do is now start covering the small buildings at the city and the state level with equitable requirements. I'll say one more thing, which is that the money is really important here. And so the IRA may be very valuable for power generation and for electric cars, perhaps. The money that the IRA provides for building decarbonization is minimal. And I don't think policy people really generally understand that. It's not a lot of money for that, unfortunately. So the economics of it really need subsidies and support from state government. So, you know, in New York, we want to, in the next few years, get to a point where the state is spending billions of dollars per year upgrading everything from public housing and affordable housing to middle income and low income subsidies for people who are homeowners who don't have a lot of money. So we want subsidies for those folks so that they come out way ahead on the economics. So that's part of the game here too.
Yeah, well, thank you. We're going to open it up to questions. I think maybe what if we rotate this and we can actually like face our audience and our audience in the Zoom
Holy
camera?
smokes.
We could do both, but while we make this
Brave
quick,
new world.
make this quick shift, we are going to, I think Logan or Ann, do you guys have questions ready? Great. Yeah. Great. Yeah, just read it out. It's fine. Or you're okay. Yeah, I got you. Tim's question. Let me see. Aha. Okay, we got a question from Tim. When the timing is right, I would be interested in how New York folks navigated union concerns with transition from gas to electric in buildings.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
You know, I worked for CWA District 1 for almost 10 years. That's the Communications Workers of America. So I was the legislative and mobilizing director for the region of the national union that covers this area. And it's a very effective, progressive, great union. So it's best known for striking at Verizon. So there was a series of very big confrontations with Verizon. You know, I was the mobilization coordinator for the district for that kind of stuff. So I did a lot of work within, you know, big labor. Unions are incredibly important and are boosting middle-class jobs, particularly for communities of color. It's the decline of labor in membership is one of the reasons we see reactionary politics in the US. because of the hollowing out of the middle class because unions are weaker. So it's really important to add labor standards as much as possible to bills. The reality, though, is that on the ground politically in New York, part of the opposition came from the industry. That's 90% of it. But in addition to that, some of the building trades unions that have members who work in fossil fuels oppose this legislation. And so we overcame that opposition with a strong multiracial campaign, arguing that this actually made sense for broader society. But nonetheless, they did oppose it. There weren't unions that supported this legislation. We were able to win regardless. Now, from our perspective as a community organization, we have a lot of low-income members who are union members or who do non-union work. This bill transitions work in the future from people who would otherwise do gas work to people who are doing electrical work in construction. And it's very valuable to keep in mind that these are the same folks. A contractor doesn't really hire different people to do a heat pump versus a gas installation. It's basically the same people. So you get more work on one end, less work on the other end in the future. So nobody loses a job, but work shifts. So that's an important thing. We want people who have a gas industry, career to be able to finish out their career, and ending gas and new construction is going to enable them to finish out their career because there's still going to be plenty of work maintaining the existing infrastructure until you're retired. But new guys, new ladies coming up in this work should not get trained for gas work. That's not the future. That is going to be the past. So you should go into electrical. That is a really good career. The truth is that benefits IBEW. It doesn't benefit work unions that are craft work in particular slices of the industry. So there's a little bit of a rearrangement of where work goes. On the net, it's positive, and we were able to make that case because that is the reality.
I want to just add a little something, which is that there was kind of a spin-off group of the folks who were working in our coalition who then went and worked on another bill about a just transition and working with the unions, especially the steam fitters. And I actually just went to a decarbonization forum that they held at the steam fitters union. So they have totally changed their tune around this. They initially had opposed the all electric buildings, but because of the HVAC and other kinds of requirements of retrofitting buildings and fitting buildings for this kind of work, they've actually gotten some great partnerships with places like I believe it's Mitsubishi that makes the heat pumps. The really there's one right next door. I'm trying to see, but so they're able to do that. So I think maybe starting with the unions, if I was going to start a campaign all over again, starting with talking to them about how they fit into the work, getting them excited about it, and having that go at the same time is an effective strategy, I imagine.
Yeah, and I'll just say that labor is different in different places. It is a big, complex animal, and there are a lot of locals and a lot of unions. And so, talking to people makes a lot of sense. But I also think that at the end of the day, this is a policy that makes sense for workers and should move forward regardless of where individual unions land on it, pro or anti.
That's a good point. Thank you both for that one. And so we got another one coming in through the chat, and there's folks who want to know what's possible statewide when it comes to statewide existing building electrification here in New York. Like what can be done or what is being done to address that?
Haha, not enough. Over to you, Emily.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. What's possible in terms of statewide existing building electrification in New York?
Well,
For existing building, yeah.
What is possible? I think there's a lot of new technology that's coming out that'll make it more feasible. I think one of the things that's really challenging is the fact that, retrofitting buildings often requires removing the people who are inside them. So that's something that I know. I went to a tech accelerator event yesterday, and I know people are specifically working on this problem of how do we make this happen at the same time. I think a great first step is electrifying all public buildings. That would be something that would be really helpful. And that would lead the way in a meaningful statement of how we're able to do it. But I'm gonna let Pete build out the answer a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, the public sector in New York City and New York State is actually ahead of the private sector on transitioning buildings. And that actually kind of makes sense when you think about it, because they're not for-profit owners. They have a very long timeline of upgrading buildings and social concerns. So it makes sense for an owner like a public entity to think about the long-term value of their assets and come off of fossil fuels. And obviously the city and the state have very deep pockets to do that. So that makes a certain amount of sense. But the problem is that we're at this crisis point where society and government and corporations have dragged their feet for so long, thanks to an effective campaign by the oil and gas companies and political inertia and, you know, powerful opposition, that we actually have to like plunge climate pollution right now to avoid global catastrophe. So on some level, we got to build this plane while we're flying it. So New York City has taken the lead, along with other municipalities, in building in requirements for covering existing large buildings. So New York State has passed better building code for construction. So the energy code, the building code, is now better than it used to be. Not good, not as good as it should be. For new construction, it's entirely gas-free. That's great. Renovations, it forces some improvements. But we have to go beyond building code to actually require change on a schedule and pace and in an equitable manner that slashes pollution at the pace and scale of the Paris Climate Agreement. And that's what Local Law 97 does at the city level. It requires large buildings to cut pollution at that pace and speed. And that creates large numbers of jobs. It's an enormous jobs program in New York City, tens of thousands of jobs in upgrading existing buildings to high energy efficiency. So many buildings are going to save money in that process, maybe most net of their financing costs. That's an approach for large buildings that makes sense. Analogies need to be worked out for small buildings where the state subsidizes that and then imposes simple requirements that a normal person can manage their way through, such as ending the sale of new fossil fuel boilers. So when your boiler conks out, you replace it with something that is clean energy.
I think the one thing I would add, and this is not just in New York, this is more broadly, is that with the IRA funding coming, and now it's starting to get to the states where they can put programs in place to help homeowners switch out their gas appliances and get upgraded wiring so they can run the new electric appliances. That's going to be really, really important to get that right. And I think it's going to require coordination between the state governments and the local governments so that constituents all over, and especially constituents who may not otherwise have the means to upgrade or change out their boilers or change out their polluting appliances, that they have this information, they know what to do. I know we're almost at time here, but are there any other quick questions? Does anyone in the room have a question? Okay, then we're gonna do one more. Good, yes? Okay, I wanna make sure. And then we have one more question from the group, but what I'm gonna ask is if we answer it, we do it in no more than a sentence or two, because I know we like to talk.
Oh, I love to talk.
I know. All right, last question. Any more resources you can share about affordability of building 100% electric new homes?
There's like a bazillion reports online from entities ranging from RMI to the New Buildings Institute. You should just Google it.
Yeah, and I know Data for Progress did something for us, right? That was all about the affordability in New York State. So you could always use that as an example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we created a nice report with a bunch of groups that we were through
Yeah.
Win Climate that showed affordability for new buildings.
Yeah, well, and
And-
our ally, oh yeah, go on.
And I was gonna say, I know Data for Progress is available to do work in multiple states. So if that's something that you have the resources for, they're more affordable than most. So now apparently I'm advertising for them.
The
Polling costs money.
yeah, it does. The only last quick thing I would add, and then I think we're gonna close, is there's also Rewiring America has a great guide on how to electrify your home, and that's about existing buildings, but also if you have a plot of land, you want to build a new home, you want to do it in the most sustainable, all electric way. Getting access to the bevy of resources that are and rebates are coming down from the federal government will seriously knock that cost down if you're trying to go all electric. With that, I really want to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Assemblymember Gallagher. Thank you, Devyani. And thank you to the folks who are here in the room and with us on Zoom. And sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning. We had this high-tech owl thing that did not work at all. So, you know, we're doing this our first hybrid event we're doing like this. So we appreciate you bearing with us. And we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And I forgot all about the technical difficulties.
Oh, no, so I shouldn't have said anything. Take care, y'all.
Bye.